The air in the Prosperity Gulch town square was thick with the smell of dust, sweat, and cheap perfume. It was the smell of desperation, a scent Alara Vance had come to know intimately. She stood on a rough-hewn wooden platform, her hands clasped tight in front of her, the knuckles white. Below her, a crowd of men milled about, their faces a blur of beards and hungry eyes. They judged the women on the platform the way they judged livestock, their gazes lingering on hips and teeth, assessing strength and breeding potential. Alara was last. The other women, younger, prettier, more delicate, had been claimed quickly, their futures bartered away for train tickets and the promise of a roof. Now only she remained. Mr. Gable, the broker who owned her contract, stepped forward. He was a small man with a booming voice and eyes like chips of slate. He gestured to Alara with a theatrical flourish. "And now, gentlemen, a woman of substance, Alara Vance." A few men chuckled. The word substance was a polite way of saying large. Alara felt the heat rise in her cheeks but kept her chin level. She would not give them the satisfaction of her shame. "Sturdy stock," Gable continued, his voice slick with the cadence of a practiced salesman. "Wide hips for birthing strong sons. Strong arms for hauling water and scrubbing floors. She won't win you any beauty prizes, but she will work from sunup to sundown and never complain." He was selling a mule, not a wife. Alara felt a familiar, cold knot tighten in her stomach. She had been sold once by her father, his last asset liquidated to cover a gambling debt. She had thought that was the bottom. She was wrong. This was the bottom. Being paraded on a stage while men debated her value as a piece of farm equipment. "What's the price on the big one?" A voice slurred from the crowd. Gable smiled, a predatory baring of teeth. "The price for a lifetime of loyal service? A mere $50, gentlemen. A bargain for a woman of her durability." Silence. The men looked at each other. $50 was a steep price for a plain face and a heavy frame, no matter how strong her arms were. They could hire a farmhand for less. A man in the front row, his face flushed with liquor, shouted, "I'll give you $10 if you throw in a saddle." A wave of coarse laughter rolled through the square. It washed over Alara, each chuckle a physical blow. She saw her father in the crowd then, near the back, his hat pulled low. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He was watching the spectacle he had created, a passive observer to her complete and utter dehumanization. Something inside her snapped. The years of quiet endurance, of swallowing insults and bearing neglect, finally broke. The cold knot in her stomach ignited into a white-hot rage. She took one step forward to the very edge of the platform. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it was so clear and cold that it cut through the lingering laughter like a shard of glass. "I am not a mare to be judged by my teeth and haunches." The square fell silent. Every eye was on her. The drunken man who had made the joke shrank back. Mr. Gable's face purpled with fury. He had lost control of his product. Alara held their gazes, one by one, letting them see the fire in her eyes. She was no longer just a large, plain woman on a block. She was a person, and she was furious. Gable recovered quickly. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. "That's enough out of you," he hissed. He turned back to the crowd, his professional smile strained. "A spirited woman. She has fire. It will keep you warm on a cold night." But the moment was broken. The men were no longer looking at an object. They were looking at a woman who had just defied them all. It made them uncomfortable. "Fine!" Gable shouted, his desperation showing.
$30.
20. "Will anyone give me $20 for this ungrateful baggage?" The silence was his answer. He had been shamed. She had shamed him. He shoved her roughly toward the back of the platform. "Get down," he spat. "You're worthless." She had known it was true. Her father had shown her. The world had confirmed it. But hearing the words spoken aloud, after she had dared to find her voice, was the cruelest cut of all. She descended the steps, her head held high, refusing to let them see the tears that burned behind her eyes. She was led to a dusty alley behind the mercantile to wait while Gable tried to salvage his day. The alley stank of refuse and stale beer. Alara leaned against the rough brick wall, the fight draining out of her, leaving a hollow ache in its place. The wall was cool against her hot skin. She slid down until she was sitting in the dirt, her worn dress pooling around her. She was alone, utterly and completely alone. The tears came then, hot and silent. They were not tears of self-pity, but of rage. A rage so profound it felt like it could burn the whole town to the ground. She wept for the girl she had been, the one who believed in kindness. She wept for the woman she had become, a commodity deemed without value. She pressed her forehead against the gritty bricks. The world was a marketplace, and she was an unsold good. Men like her father and Mr. Gable were the brokers, moving assets and liabilities around a board she couldn't even see. Kindness was a currency she did not possess and could not afford. Trust was a fool's game, a vow formed in the crucible of her humiliation. It was a cold, hard thing, forged in the fire of public shame and private grief. Never again. Never again would she depend on the mercy of a man. Never again would she mistake a soft word for a safe harbor. She would build her own walls, so high and so thick that no one could ever breach them. She would rely on her own two hands, her own mind. She would be her own fortress. From this day forward, she owed no one anything. Not deference, not obedience, not hope. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a muddy streak on her cheek. The tears stopped. The rage cooled into a solid core of resolve. Let them think her worthless. It would be their mistake. Chug. The sound of boots on the hard-packed dirt of the alley entrance made her look up. A man stood there, silhouetted against the bright square. He was tall, but he didn't loom. He just occupied his space with a quiet stillness. It was Caleb Hale. She recognized him from the crowd. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't spoken. He had just watched, his face unreadable beneath the brim of a dusty hat. He walked toward her, his steps unhurried. He stopped a few feet away, taking her in, the tear-streaked face, the defiant set of her jaw. He looked at her not with pity or lust, but with a strange, assessing gaze. It was the way a man looks at a fence that needs mending, or a sky that threatens rain. He was calculating, not judging. Mr. Gable scurried up behind him, his face a mask of obsequious greed.
Mr. Hale.
Pleasure. Changed your mind, have you? I can give you a good price. A very good price, considering the trouble she's caused. Caleb Hale didn't look at Gable. His eyes remained on Alara. I'll take her contract, he said, his voice a low baritone.
$15.
Gable sputtered. 15. That's an insult. It's 5 more than anyone else offered, Caleb replied, his tone flat. Take it or leave it. Gable looked from Caleb's implacable face to Alara's defiant one. He knew a lost cause when he saw one. Fine, he grumbled, snatching the bills Caleb held out. She's your problem now. He turned and scurried away before Caleb could change his mind. Caleb Hale was her new owner. The transaction was complete. The vow she had just made felt like ash in her mouth. He held out a hand to her. She ignored it, pushing herself to her feet with her own strength. She stood before him, her shoulders back, waiting for his first command. I'm Caleb Hale, he said, as if they were being introduced at a church social. I know who you are, she said. Her voice was brittle. He nodded, seeming to understand the wall she had put up between them. My wagon is over here. He led the way out of the alley. She followed a few paces behind, a prisoner walking behind her warden. She expected him to start laying out her duties, the rules of his house. Instead, he was silent. They reached a sturdy buckboard wagon hitched to a pair of placid-looking horses. He stopped and turned to her. The afternoon sun lit the lines on his face, the dust in his clothes. He looked tired. Not just tired from a long day, but a deeper, bone-deep weariness. I paid your contract, Miss Vance, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Not to buy you. but to get you out of that man's hands. What he was doing was wrong. Alara stared at him, suspicion coiling in her gut. This was a trick, a new kind of tactic to ensure her compliance. You have a room of your own at my ranch, he continued, as if reciting a list of facts. It has a lock on the inside. You will have the only key. You are free to leave anytime you wish. The road back to town is easy to follow. If you choose to stay and work, I will pay you fair wages. $1 a week, plus room and board. She couldn't process it. A lock, wages, the freedom to leave. These were not the terms of a sale. Why? She asked, the word sharp, accusatory. What do you want from me? His gaze didn't waver. I have a daughter. She needs looking after. The house is a mess. I needed a housekeeper. Gable was selling contracts. His methods are his own. My methods are mine. She searched his face for a lie, for the hidden hook in this generous offer. She found nothing but a stark, unadorned honesty. It was more unsettling than any threat. Her vow echoed in her mind. Never trust a man's kindness. I don't need your charity, she said, her voice hard. It isn't charity, he said calmly. It's a job offer. You can accept it or decline it, he gestured to the wagon seat. The ride to my place is long. We should get started if we want to make it before dark. She stood frozen for a moment, caught between the hell she knew and the bewildering uncertainty he offered. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But where would she go? Back to Gable? Back to her father? There were no good roads for a woman like her. Slowly, without a word, she walked to the wagon and climbed onto the seat. He had won this round, but she would be watchful. She would wait for the other shoe to drop. It always did. The ride was long and silent. The wagon wheels churned up a steady cloud of dust that coated everything in a fine red powder. Caleb Hale didn't press her for conversation. He just drove, his hands sure on the reins, his eyes on the horizon. Alara watched the landscape change from the dusty clutter of town to wide, open plains. The sky was immense, a brilliant, unforgiving blue. The land itself looked hard and tired, cracked and thirsty. It suited her mood. They stopped once, when the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the prairie. Caleb pulled the wagon over near a small, gurgling creek. Horses need a drink, he said, climbing down. Alara remained on the wagon seat, watching him. He led the horses to the water, his movements economical and sure. He didn't rush them. He let them drink their fill. When he came back to the wagon, he reached into a saddlebag and pulled out a small, cloth-wrapped bundle and a canteen. He walked over to her side of the wagon. Are you hungry? He asked. The question caught her off guard. She was starving. She hadn't eaten since the morning, and her stomach was a tight, aching knot. But admitting a need felt like a weakness, a concession she was unwilling to make. She just shook her head. He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze taking in the stubborn set of her jaw. He didn't argue. He simply placed the bundle and the canteen on the seat beside her. It's just bread and cheese, he said. Eat it when you're ready. Then he did something that shattered her composure. He turned his back on her. He walked a dozen paces away and stood looking out over the creek, giving her privacy. He wasn't testing her. He wasn't watching to see if she would break. He was simply giving her food and the dignity to eat it unobserved. It was a small thing, a simple, thoughtless act of decency. But for Alara it was monumental. No one had ever considered her dignity before. Her needs were always secondary, her presence a given. To be granted the small courtesy of privacy was a kindness so unexpected, so profound, it felt like a physical blow. Tears pricked her eyes again. She fought them back fiercely. Crying was a weakness, but her hands trembled as she unwrapped the cloth. Inside were 2 thick slices of bread with a slab of sharp, crumbly cheese between them. It was plain, simple food. It was the most wonderful thing she had ever seen. She ate quickly, forcing herself to chew and swallow around the lump in her throat. The bread was dry, the cheese salty, tasted of respect. When she was done, she took a long drink from the canteen. The water was cool and clean. It washed the dust from her throat. Section